Last time it took a minute. Oh, there it goes. Hey, everybody. I was trying to make sure everything was working. So I logged in a couple minutes early. Looks like there's a slight little delay, but nothing too crazy. Yep. Let me figure out how to do my screen. If this works. Well. The restream really hates me. We'll figure it out. Hold on one sec. I'm going to try and upload the slides and then see if that works. That way it just makes it a little bit easier. Something changed. We'll figure it out one way or the other. It's uploading. I appreciate everybody for joining. We'll see. Hey, Saif. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Somebody could throw in a chat channel that they can hear me okay. I appreciate that. I think we had everything working earlier, but normally have Hey, Steve. Thanks for joining. Okay. Hey, Julian. How's RSA? So thanks, Luke. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining. I'm trying to upload these slides right now. I thought we'd be able to share the screen, but it was having issues, of course. So we'll hopefully. Thanks, Malik. Hey, how are you? All these familiar faces, quote unquote, from LinkedIn. I appreciate everybody for jumping on. And oh, good. It looks like okay. So, let's. I appreciate everybody bearing with me. Now we just need. I will figure it out one day, I promise. And there we go. Okay, well, I added, added that. Oh, here we go. I bet this is we'll give it a second. It should flip over. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, Amit, thank you for coming. I appreciate you. That's one of my weird. Okay, let me do So after all that, now you can probably hear me again. Dun, 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 dun. Now we're gonna have to see how we can get these two things to coexist. Hopefully, can everybody hear me now? I know there's a slight delay. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. I figure I would figure it out one day. So you didn't get to hear me drone on about myself, which is good. So, um, and that yeah, I think everybody here probably knows me from LinkedIn, where I post yes, ICSOT cybersecurity materials. Thanks, I appreciate that. So, um, and just to mention, we do have Bean Size Greenfield coming up. So if you're in the area, southeast region of the United States, we'd love to have you. I just put that out as a quick shout out for B sides. So when I was talking about earlier, looking at the presentation, right? And this I come back for going back to that Megadeth song, right? Countdown to Extinction, right? And if you're not familiar with Megadeth, any Megadeth fans in the crowd, let me know. But this is the what Megadeth looked like originally. This is probably late 1980s, I suspect. So they've changed a lot. They still are around and still actually play and are pretty amazing musicians. Dave Mustaine, who founded the group, he's the third gentleman on the left. He actually got kicked out of Metallica, probably the biggest well-known metal band in the world. He got kicked out of the original Metallica group for doing too many drugs, which I thought was interesting because how much how much drugs, how many drugs, I don't know what's the correct nomenclature, but how much drugs do you have to do to get kicked out of Metallica? That had to have been very intense. So but he's very public in his recovery and that road that he's led since then, and it's really fascinating. But so that's again, that's a Megadeth, probably late circa 80s, and I think that the song I'm referring to, I think, was early 90s, maybe even 1990 when it uh, came out. So we kind of fast forward today though, and I think some of you, here are familiar with, the rash of hacktivist attacks that we've seen in ICS OT over, especially the last 6 to 12 months. A lot of it, whether it's because of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we see a lot of course, conflict in the Middle East. In this case, we had the cyber Avengers, which try not to laugh now when I say the name, but the Cyber Avengers, right, is a hacktivist group that's loosely linked to the Iranian government, where they were hacking these Unitronic PLCs that were exposed to the internet using default passwords. And you can see the PLC actually has an integrated edge HMI, so they figured out, oh, we can find the PLC connected to the internet, access it remotely, and we can upload our own little HMI picture and say, yes, you've been hacked. And I think their idea was Unitronics is manufactured in Israel, so it was one of their ways to make their point as hacktivist. So I think it's a great lesson though for us in the community to understand, right, that we do have exposures in ICSOT. And it was also interesting. This got a lot of press in here in the United States. And there's still a lot of conversations, even up to the White House, because of these attacks where we're seeing these exposures. Now, it's interesting. One was this PLC. I found this picture in the PLC subreddit where I lurk a lot. And it was actually posted by a gentleman that runs the systems at a brewery, I think in Pennsylvania. So it wasn't actually one of the PLCs that was known to be hacked in water treatment facilities. And all the water treatment facilities that I'm aware of that got hit in the United States, they all fell back to manual operations and they didn't have any service to customers that were impacted. In Ireland, there was a case. They had about 160 clients that were out of water for 2 days, which doesn't sound like the end of the world. I just always think about, well, maybe it's not 160 people for 2 days, but what if it's 160 people for 2 weeks? Or 2 months? For those 160 people, their life is completely changed. Or what if it's 16,000 people or 160,000 people, right? There's a very big difference, and it's one of those where it could potentially happen. So, but again, we're trying to stay away from the big FUD and keep it as a realistic conversation, right? And that's hopefully what this comes across as. And if you have questions or comments as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll try and keep an eye on over there as well. So, oh, Man of War and Halloween. I could tell who are our friends from Europe versus the Americans, because there's definitely different taste in metal for sure, or different schools kind of. So yeah, I don't discriminate. I like all metal. So, but so I did want to talk a little bit about the history of kind of a lot of the major events in ICS OT cybersecurity. So some of you might be familiar with some of these, maybe all of these. And the idea was kind of just kind of keep an eye on the time between these different events, because for me, and there are a lot of other events. I love to look into all these different events over time, but the one that really sticks out to me, um, to kind of start off the for me again kind of modern ICS OT cybersecurity, was the Davis Besse plant. So Davis Besse was a power plant that had its internal data historians on the OT network compromised by SQL Slammer. And this is where I get fascinated, because SQL Slammer is what we call commodity malware, right? It's malware designed to spread like a worm from unpatched Windows systems, or I should say Windows systems running unpatched Microsoft SQL Server, right? Which is just about every data historian out there. And so we had data historians inside of a power plant that were infected by a worm designed to run around the internet. Like, well, how did that happen? Well, we know, right? The somehow the internal OT network was connected to the internet, or potentially someone brought it in like on a USB drive or on a laptop. In this case, and this is where it gets even more interesting, Davis Besse was a nuclear power plant, still is. It's a nuclear power plant. So we have a nuclear plant that had its internal data historians infected with a worm running around the internet. And what had happened was the contractors that managed the data historian systems had run a data T1 line from the plant to their office. So when their office got infected, that infection just came right over that T1 line and hit those data historians. So it's one of those where, wow, that's that's a lot to take in, right? And when you had a nuclear plant, that thankfully the plant itself didn't go down. They took, they had to take part of the plant down. That of course the data historians, and it took them a couple hours to rebuild anything. Of course, they ripped out the T1 line. Hopefully, they fired the contractor, um, and moved on, and hopefully haven't had an incident since then. Right. But that was back in 2023, so 20 years ago. You can see that, and there's a little incidents, of course, that happen in there, but the next one, the big one, was really for Configure, which again, it's commodity malware going around infecting unpatched Windows systems, primarily out over the internet. So we had multiple different OT environments or industrial environments that were impacted by Configure, including, you can see, power plants. So it always makes you wonder, even though, yeah, we always think these environments are air gapped like our nuclear power plants, and it turns out they're not. And that's, we always have to assume in any of our ICS OT environments, there's an internet connection somewhere, somewhere. So, and then in 2010, for me, this is where again I got into ICS or OT cybersecurity because honestly, it wasn't something I had thought about before Stuxnet. And then Stuxnet hit, and I just looked at it at this technological marvel, right? That had come out, and you look at it, and not only it was this, it had 4 Windows 0 days that were built in, but and then it was brought into this environment. And of course, there's lots of stories on how that happened, but it came into the Natanz facility in Iran where the malware, had went through the Windows systems to find the Siemens controllers, which were used to then spin the centrifuges, which were responsible for taking the uranium and uranium gas and spinning it to enrich it to be able to make ultimately nuclear bombs. And where Stuxnet, right, it was the ultimate ICS piece of malware because it impacted visibility of operators and resulted in ultimately in a loss of control and physical damage to those centrifuges. And the Iranians had no idea for months and months what was actually going on. And behind the scenes, right, the centrifuges would spin up and spin down and spin up and spin down and spin up and spin down, even though you're sitting in the control room and everything looks good. So it was really this, again, it was just this masterpiece that the Americans and the Israelis had put together to be able to target the facility. And ideally, right, their goal was to set back the Iranian nuclear program, which they did, and it sounds like for 4 or 5, 6 years. I think though this was the big watershed moment for us in ICSOT cybersecurity because and this is where and Andy Greenberg does an incredible job if in his book Sandworm talking about it. You had the other countries like Russia and China in particular had seen, it's like, oh well, look what the Americans just did with the Israelis, and what were the repercussions, right? What was the not a bad term, but what was the fallout for the Americans and the Israelis for launching this attack against another nation state? And there weren't any. And so they, yeah, realized, well, we can do it too. And I think also what happened was that, and this is just me personally, was that you had the Chinese and the Russians and the others. They saw it stuck. Then they're like, "Wow, we really need to up our game. We really need to step it up because we're way behind." Because I think even today, Stuxnet is would be considered this technological masterpiece. So so you had countries out there realizing, hey, we really need to do a lot more. Uh, and at the same time, we're not going to get in trouble for launching these different types of attacks. So after Stuxnet, right, things can go kind of quiet for a while. Yeah, there's really interesting little events that happen, but the next big event didn't happen until 5 years later, where we actually had the group Sandworm from the Russian nation state that went into power generation facilities in Ukraine and turned the power off for hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter. It just I can only imagine, especially being a parent then. And but the power was off, I think 6, 7, 8 hours before they fell back to manual operations and had everybody back up and running. And so, was it the end of the world? No, but it just showed where you had one nation state targeting another. And this is where, and I love how, Rob Lee takes a very strong stand, as he should, about, when you have a nation state targeting civilian infrastructure. It wasn't just, you going into, a kind of a military target. It was civilian infrastructure, right? Impacting hundreds of thousands of civilians. And, that which should always be off the table, but obviously what we see playing out in the news today, that's not the case. So the Russians went back in, went back in a year, almost to the day, and turned the power off again. Different facilities, more transmission related, and but still had a similar impact. right? People didn't have any power, smaller numbers, but still. And there's an idea maybe it happened in 2017 as well. It was just kind of very, I think, limited, and nobody wanted to talk about it because you don't want the poor Ukrainians to look bad a third time in a row. But 2017 was when, I know the slides are a little weird because of the kind of the slideshow, but in 2017 is where we had the Trisis event. And interestingly enough, I was actually taking Rob Lee's class, his grid course at Sands when Trisis was actually happening. So a few of us were getting kind of the behind the scenes play by play when we went to lunch or dinner. It was really, obviously fascinating. You couldn't, pay for that type of experience. Um, and just the fact that here we had the Russian nation state again come into a petrochemical facility owned and operated by Saudi Aramco, and the attackers had been in there for quite some time and had control over everything, including the DCS and of course the SIS. If you're not familiar with safety instrumented systems or the SIS is the idea of a fail safe backup. So if you're in a facility, if you're in a plant, and if there's a fault condition anywhere that might lead to something that, well, could kill somebody or harm, could lead to physical harm. It could lead to some type of maybe explosion that could create an impact or harm the environment, or just even harm the plant itself, right? And impact availability and uptime. Right? The idea is that SIS would shut down the facility before that could happen. And so in this case, the attackers had control over, they mentioned like 99.99% of the SIS. And Rob Lee always stresses the only reason that you would take control over the SIS is to kill somebody, right? Or at least destroy a facility or part of a facility where people are working, right? And depending on what type of facility, you can then start to imagine the repercussions that could happen if there was some type of industrial incident. And so that was Trident or Tricentis. A lot of us at that time, especially that week, I mean, it's one of those where, it's horrible that it happened, but thankfully, there was no impact, right? It was found out because the attackers made a simple programming error, maybe on purpose, is kind of the thought there. But they made a programming error. It was found by the operators who brought in the vendors. It was the Triconics uh, controllers that had been impacted. They brought in Dragos. I think Mandian also had come in, so it was kind of like all hands on deck. And so at the end of the day, it was kind of like no harm, no foul. But we also thought this is where the world is going to wake up to ICS/OT cybersecurity, and this has to be it. And it wasn't. So, we had Stuxnet, right? But that was a very niche case, and I think in a lot of times my dog wanted to say hello. Yeah, hello. And he had jumped up here. And we had, between Stuxnet, but it was also, I think, very hard for maybe some people to follow or comprehend. He got tired of me. And then we had Triasis, or sometimes people say, Trident as Mandian calls it. And and again, we were like, oh, this is what's going to happen. But I guess there was no real world visible impact uh, to people. And so it really, yes, it was big in the community, but at the end of the day, it didn't change much. So thankfully, in 4 years later, we had Colonial Pipeline, and with Colonial Pipeline, there was a real world impact that people saw. There were a couple of things that were really important with Colonial Pipeline, especially for us in ICS/OT cybersecurity, right? We had Colonial Pipeline is the operator of the largest pipeline in the United States, mostly on the starts in the kind of the middle. southern middle part of the country in Texas and goes all the way to the northeast up around New York, and it supplies gasoline for the entire East Coast, a good portion of the country. And so Colonial Pipeline, when they got hit, the pipeline was offline for 10 days. So people actually saw a real impact where I live in Greenville, South Carolina, kind of middle-ish of the East Coast, that you would go to one gas station and they didn't have gas. Now you could go around the corner and another gas station would have gas. You just had to wait in line for it, right? Long line. And but there was that real world impact that people saw. Now, also behind the scenes, right, we also look at the attack itself. Well, why did the pipeline go down? And the idea was, before Colonial Pipeline, we only primarily worried about nation state attackers in control system environments, right? It was always the Russians, it was the Chinese, it was the Americans, right, that were targeting control system environments. We didn't worry about the criminal element. We didn't worry about hacktivists per se, right? They're always there, right? But they just weren't on the radar. But with Colonial Pipeline wasn't a nation state actor. It was a group of ransomware operators. And it was a group of ransomware operators out of Russia called DarkSide. So I'm a big Star Wars geek, I can admit it. And so I'll go with Darkside, great name, but they weren't targeting Colonial Pipeline. They weren't targeting the OT network of the United States' largest gasoline pipeline. They were just sending email addresses to every or phishing emails to every email address that they had for everybody on the planet, trying to get somebody to click on a link or open up an attachment to infect their system to spread to all of the other IT systems. And they wanted to get paid a ransom at the end of the day, and then they would just move on to somebody else. And so with the Colonial Pipeline example, right? Somebody in the back office falls for the phishing attack, they infect their system, it spreads to all the other IT systems. And then depending, there's a lot of stories going on. I don't know the details, probably only if you're in the government or, work for a company like a Dragos or Mandant or worked at Colonial Pipeline really know. I know the CEO testified that I think Derek Harp was talking about this on a CISA webinar the other day, if I remember right. That the CEO testified that they shut down the pipeline out of an abundance of caution. I've heard, some people say, at that point, Colonial Pipeline couldn't even tell what type of liquid was in the pipeline. So regardless, the pipeline again was shut down for 10 days, and there was this real world impact. So again, there was two things that really happened. One, there was a real world impact. The bad thing was this is where all the attackers realized, oh, we can attack these things called industrial control systems or operational technology, and we can make money. And this is where you see data coming from like Dragos, right? And they had started, last year they were putting out ransomware reports, right, on a quarterly basis, showing the increase of ransomware attacks impacting OT environments. Now, thankfully, the one for the first quarter this year showed a decrease the first time since probably Colonial Pipeline of 33% because a lot of those attackers, they're going to where the money's at. And they're going to healthcare right now. They're going to hospitals, right? Which is very despicable, but right, that's what they do, right? They're in the business to make money, and most of them don't have any scruples. So we had Colonial Pipeline. That was in 2011. But if we go back and kind of look at the timeline, I mean, we went years and years before any major incident in the ICSOT world. And now we see very significant incidents, at least what I would consider very significant incidents on a almost weekly basis, if not almost daily these days. Right? So we talk about, we saw the Russians had targeted the utility providers in Denmark. So there's a lot of great work by Sector CERN and the work they had done to detect those attacks and work with the providers to, shunt and protect against those attacks. We had Mandiant reported not a couple months ago, right? I think in the end of 2023 that the Russians had gone in and turned off the power for the Ukrainians again, just at the same time as they were dropping bombs again in Kiev. And so I don't know why they took a year to report that, but maybe considerations because of the war. So not 100% sure. So I was just looking at some of the content. Yes, Countdown to Zero Day is a great book by Kim Zetter, who wrote that. It's another one if you want to dig deep into Sandworm, or to Stuxnet, sorry. And then of course I always go to Sandworm by Andy Greenberg. So and then definitely, yeah, we could definitely do some deep dives like a Stuxnet and a Trisis, of course, are my probably my favorite ones, for sure. Um, Kind of going along those lines, Volt Typhoon, these days, at least from a American perspective, and I know we have folks from all over, but from an American perspective, has got a lot of traction, and I think also in Europe and in other uh, countries in different regions. But with Volt Typhoon, we have the idea of a Chinese nation state adversary group, where also Dragos tracks part of Volt Typhoon, which is a very large group, and then Dragos specifically tracks Volt Site. Volt Site is the part of Volt Typhoon that focuses on industrial control or control system networks. And this is where they're found in a power plant in Guam. And then we started taking those indicators of compromise and looking in other environments and realized they're in a lot of critical infrastructure in the United States and Europe and other places all around the world. And it's one of those which for me it's one of the, I it's a great story because it really speaks to the lack of network security monitoring in control system environments. And Rob Lee, I know he's been talking and highlighting this over at least the last couple months because I don't remember him talking about this before, but where he sees that there's about 5% of the control system environments today around the world globally that have network security monitoring in place, right? So when you look at a Dragos report or a Mandiant report or waterfall security, any of the reports out there, they're only talking about known events, and we only know about the events that happen in about 5% of the OT environments that are out there, which says a lot, right? We're very blind to what's actually going on. We only know about those environments that we're monitoring, or like a Colonial Pipeline, probably not doing any network security monitoring there. I'm sure they are now, right? But probably weren't earlier. Again, I don't know. I'm just guessing. But, right, we knew about it because there was a real world impact. And now, of course, there are countries like in the United States where we're looking at passing your reporting requirements for at least critical infrastructure. If you have critical infrastructure and you have an incident, you have to report it to the government. That information ideally will be shared with the public, so we'll have a better understanding of what's going on out there, right? So but yeah, Jacob mentioned, yeah, Denmark was sector certain. That did amazing job, I thought, just bringing those providers together and doing that. So Charles mentions increases will continue to gather momentum. Yeah, exactly. That's the whole point of the presentation, right? Is this idea that the rate is accelerating, right? So appreciate that. So yeah, White Art mentions over on YouTube. Yes, Configure is out there still, and you still see SQL Slammer and all these old viruses out on the internet still running around there. So you also mentioned at the end of last year, some of the larger ports, like in Australia, the port of Nagoya in Japan went down because they're more of the IT systems that were responsible for tracking and being able to, move containers from ship to shore and vice versa, and we're down. And those systems go down, your ports are down, and so we saw that, and that's something we should have already learned, from the Not Petya days, which was another gift from Sandworm, right? Where they had taken out Maersk, which is the world's largest shipping company in the world. But we have to learn these lessons, unfortunately, over and over again. So, some of you have heard of Foxnet, which came out, what news, like last week or the week after, talking about, and for me, I was like, what, good for the Ukrainians in a way, right? Because the Ukrainians, um, and whether the hacktivists associated with the Ukrainians, or I think the Ukrainians themselves, were able to essentially brick these sensor gateways that were responsible for collecting sensor data from 28,000 sensors that they had in rail and airports and water and wastewater and all these different control environments, and to be able to interrupt those processes. And so, um, it was an interesting attack, and it was even more interesting because they published all the information on the internet. You can actually go to their site and access all the information, and including the source code, which isn't, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish by sharing that, but all of that is, but it is still very fascinating case study. So, and we see a lot of hacktivist activity today, right? Whether it's between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine and Russia, we have hacktivists on both sides of the conflict, and the same thing in the Middle East, and in other areas. So it's fascinating, and then also, this idea that a lot of hacktivist groups are started by nation states, and whether they stay that way or they kind of splinter off, and or maybe you just have some hacktivists that are loosely associated with nation states. Like we just recently, I think last week or the week before, in the United States, we had a group loosely associated with Sandworm that got into a couple of systems in the US, and they're just clicking buttons in HMIs as quickly as they can. Actually, I think I added it to this presentation, right, to see what they could break. And here it actually is. Now, I think there's sound on this, so hopefully the sound won't kill anybody. Oh, the video didn't play. Oh, that's so sad, and probably because of the streaming platform. But here's an example of the HMI for one of the water towers. You can see in the city of Abernathy. I think this is the Texas incident, where again, and there's a video you can show this. I posted on LinkedIn, but you can also find it on Wired, and where they actually took all the videos from this group called the Army of Russia, and they're also Cyber Army of Russia Reborn. They're loosely affiliated with Sandworm. So we had apparently seen that they had created their YouTube channel from the same IP address that was controlled by Sandworms. So that's the kind of the affiliation. But the videos actually show them, getting in the systems. I think some of these were actually only available internally, so they weren't exposed to the internet. So it wasn't as simple. So they were getting into the OT networks, and then they were finding the HMIs, and then at that point they were just clicking buttons. They weren't taking time to understand the process and how to really do, true damage or harm. They were just clicking buttons from what it looked like. But again, kind of going back to the idea of the presentation, and the title was just this idea that, yeah, the rate of attacks is accelerating, right? And because we went from years and years before anything of real interest happened in the OT world, to where now every week there's something I find absolutely fascinating. Like the Fuxnet was super fascinating, or watching all those videos on Wired from the cyber army of Russia Reborn. Just the fact that they were posting those on their Telegram channel, and it just and it's for me, it's very interesting. I expect a lot of other folks as well. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here. So definitely check those out. I'll go back and I'll put some links in the session notes as well. But the rest of the presentation, and why I wanted to put it together, is this is what drives me crazy. And I know, seeing some of the folks in chat, that I've talked with some of you about some of these things. It's this idea that as a community in ICSOT cybersecurity, we understand the importance. But there, even in the community, there's still some folks that don't think we need to do anything for cybersecurity, which drives me bonkers. We still have a lot of owners and operators in environments that don't understand that they need to do things for cybersecurity. Now, I can understand, especially like water's getting a lot of attention these days, and I understand, small water providers, they don't even have an IT person full time, let alone someone for OT, let alone cybersecurity, anything. So I can understand where those types of owners and operators, cybersecurity is not even on their radar. I get that. But some of the, especially medium, even some larger environments, where I get to talk with a lot of folks from all around the world, and there's definitely some interesting environments out there where there's very little security, almost none. Right. And there are some people, even in our own community, where they talk about, this: we don't need to spend money on cybersecurity today, because what are we really protecting against, right? Nobody's died yet, so why do we need to spend the money? And I'm just, why are we waiting for somebody to die, right? Or why are we, even if you take out physical and environmental security, even though those are our number one and number two priorities, if you take those out of the equation, we always focus, okay, on availability and uptime. So if the average ransomware attack takes us down for 10 days, right, how much money are we losing? I have one client that I work with, that if they lose their systems, I mean, they would lose $8 million right away if they lose their system for 4 hours. And because of the way their production works, they lose basically 6 weeks of work in product, just being down for 4 hours. Right? It's so again, physical security, environmental safety are always top concerns, but take those even out of the equation, right? And think of it from, okay, availability, if that's what you want, right? We can't wait, right? So, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but want to go. Oh, thanks, Alston, for Alston through the link in to the LinkedIn chat for the Wired story. So I appreciate that. Um, so when my old Greenville Texans, it was good seeing you. Um, And so it's really, yeah, fascinating, all the videos. They show the plant in Texas, and then a couple of sites in Poland. So for all of our, like, friends in Poland, like Jacob, we were just talking. so so I focus on a couple of things, right? And when we look at education, which a big reason why I post on LinkedIn, and why we're actually having this session. We talk about building the partnership between IT and OT, and then from a technical perspective, right? That if there's only one thing I could do, right, it always comes down to secure network architecture. So I want to talk about these for the remaining time that we have. And so, and we've already started to talk about, there's this idea of education. Some people use awareness, or education and awareness. I like education better. I don't Awareness gets a bad rap, I think, these days, because it's just like, hey, I'm going to teach you about phishing, and you're going to get phishing emails, and don't click on them, and and just kind of go on with your day. Education, it's like we're getting people the knowledge that they need to make the right decisions on their own. And when we look at the ways that attackers get into the environment, right? When they get into your IT, or sorry, with your ICS or OT network, right? The majority of the time they're coming through the IT back office, right? So they get into IT and they move into the OT network. That's the vast majority of the time. Now they can be brought in by what we call transitory cyber assets. If you're using the NERC terminology, right, where you talk about things like either USB drives, or what about a laptop, right? We have contractors coming into our environments all the time. Floor, right? In my day job, we are going into a lot of environments, right, and plugging in laptops. I never want one of our laptops to be the cause of an incident. I wish we didn't bring our laptops in, right? I wish they would provide us with them. I don't want to be responsible. So, or even what about smartphones, right? That can be hooked up to a USB drive, maybe on an engineering workstation, right? What's on it? Right. We know we can have control systems that get exposed to the internet. Unfortunately, we can find them through Shodan and Google all the time. We can look at remote access capabilities that especially are taken over by attackers, especially those that are designed very poorly. And then you can have malicious insiders, whether it's your own employees, or a lot of times it turns out that what if it's those contractors that you're working with, right? Anybody that you give access, right? We give them, oh yeah, here's your secure access credentials, right? And here's your ability to log into the OT network from over the internet, right? And what can they do with that? So there's a lot of damage that they can do. Right. Now, of course, again, I focus a lot on education. I think we really need more people in ICS OT cyber and it's not just more people, but understand both sides of the equation, right? We need people that understand cybersecurity, and a lot of this comes from IT cybersecurity, but we also have to understand the engineering perspective as well. And you're not going to find people, right, that understand both, completely, right? It's just, and there's a few, and I'm trying to be one of those. I'm still expanding my engineering knowledge. So, it's, but those people are very rare. So I think we have to understand not everybody is going to be a full-time engineer and also be a full-time cybersecurity specialist, right, to know everything that we need. But it goes back to, we have to be able to work together. We'll talk about that in a second. If you want some free training resources, CISA has an entire series of online courses that a lot of people have gone to. And the last two courses, you can even go to Idaho National Labs to take, which I think are incredible. I was supposed to go take them, and then COVID hit, so I still want to go out and do those. I think they would be a lot of fun. So, and then depending on where you came from, if you're coming from an IT background or an OT background, I wrote the free ebooks for getting started in ICS OT cybersecurity. Um, which you can find on you can go to mikeholcomb.com, or look on LinkedIn, or reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested in tracking those down. And then I did put I think 20 plus hours. It actually turned out to be 20, just over 25 hours, the course on YouTube as well. And it's really cool because it was like 13,000 people have looked at the first part. Um, which is really cool to see. So I appreciate everybody that's checked that out. So I get a lot of great feedback, and a lot of people from companies like Dragos and Siemens and Honeywell, and it was really, and just people everywhere. And so it's really cool. So hopefully, if you're looking at learning more, definitely check it out. So um, we mentioned this idea that, remember, you're not going to have people that are all, I mean, that can know everything about engineering, and which is an impossible task. And you're not going to know everything about IT cybersecurity and how it applies, or how we kind of translate it into OT cybersecurity. That's how I look at it, because I'm from an IT cybersecurity background. But so you have people in, like, people like myself, like this would have been me 15 years ago, right? I see a cybersecurity is just like IT cybersecurity. Like I would come in and say, hey, we just have to patch all these machines, just reboot everything and you're good. Right? That would have been me 15 years ago. I know better now, but I understand if that's, what somebody thinks, when they want to like, just step foot in a power plant for the the first time. I get it. That 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 was me. So, um, now you have people typically on the control system side, right? That says, well, ICS cybersecurity is not IT cybersecurity. So, and that's very true in a lot of ways for sure. But to me, it's more this idea that, right, ICS cybersecurity and IT cybersecurity actually have more in common than they don't. Are there different repercussions? Yes. Do we do things like vulnerability management completely different in the two? Yes. But when you look at the basics and the fundamentals, right? Again, we have more common than we don't. So I always like to focus on the commonalities, right? Build those bridges on what we have in common, and then be able to look at the differences and understand the differences. But if you're just talking about how we're different, it I think it puts a lot of people off, right? Or it just becomes this confrontational situation, which is really what we're talking about in this next part of the presentation, right? This idea that it becomes the we always talk about the OT side of the house, right? And then the IT side of the house. And it, w- we allow both sides of the house, right, from a networking perspective to communicate, right, to share information. And then w- OT is fighting against IT or IT is fighting against OT. My girlfriend's a licensed marriage and family and marriage therapist. So I always talk about, IT and OT, it's like a bad relationship or a bad marriage because you either have people that are just fighting all the time, right? And they're always at each other's throats, or they're not communicating it at all. And uh, and the end result of either of those, right? If nothing's getting done, and if nothing's getting done, if nothing's being accomplished from a security perspective, the attackers are winning, right? Or we're just setting ourselves up for failure for that next incident to happen. We're going to be the next Colonial Pipeline if OT and IT can't work together. And I've seen the good, the bad, and ugly, everything in between. I've seen environments where IT and OT, like the manufacturing client I was mentioning earlier, right? Great teams. They seem to work really, really, really well together. Now they're only a year old, so we'll see what's like in 5 years. Maybe not so much then. I hopefully, they still work really well together. I've seen other environments that they don't even talk to each other, and nothing gets done. So yeah, it can be very, very, very concerning, right? So the point is, whether it's the IT side of the house or the OT side of the house, we live in the same house, right? It's in our best interest, you would think, that we work together to protect the environment. So we really have to look at things at the whole and work on them together. So it's a people problem mostly. It's more a people problem than a technology problem. So I know that's not an easy fix. And then real quickly, lastly, because I can really sum this up quickly, because Rob Lee, and I've heard him say this before, I love he has a couple of things that he talks about that I really really connect with. But one is, you our environments, they don't need zero trust. They just need a firewall, right? Is really what it comes down to. Right. I do talk about, using the Purdue model as a way to introduce cybersecurity into control system environments that aren't mature, or, the expanded Purdue model. Because I actually had when I first started posting on LinkedIn, I had created a post called "The Purdue Model Can Be Used for Cybersecurity." I thought I was really smart, and I thought I thought this is a great idea. Where, I created this series called "What the Heck Is." Because I know for me, when I was getting into control system environments, it's like all these terms, right? Like HMI, PLC, DCS, RTU, the Purdue model. Like I, it was like, what the, it was just so, it seemed like overwhelming. And so I created like this what the heck series, right? And I did one for the Purdue model and talking about how, what the heck is the Purdue model? And I woke up the next day and I checked LinkedIn first thing because I was really, really hardcore into LinkedIn when I first started. And I saw that this one gentleman who's, fairly well known in the community, um, he's from outside of the United States. So he had reposted to his community. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then I saw what he said. And he said, like, oh, the Purdue model is something that proves you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I think the point was, yes, the Purdue model as it was originally intended was not designed for cybersecurity, right? It's like, "Oh, okay. I get that." So, okay, we'll say the expanded Purdue model, now we refer to it as, right? Because the original Purdue model didn't even have a DMZ sitting between IT and OT, right? Okay, I get that. So but it goes back to, Rob Lee's point where, and this is a slide I have from my first project, but the idea that, you know, again, you don't need zero trust in a control system environment. You just need a firewall. Saying, meaning it's, most environments, right? They're not doing anything for security. So the first thing you need to start with is a firewall. You want to get to zero trust down the road when you're very, much more mature, knock yourself out. But if you have no security today, the first thing you need to do is get that firewall between IT and OT. And Rob, I remember the first day of his grid course, right, focused on the fact that if you can not allow IT to originate connections into OT, right? Don't allow IT to reach into OT. Just by doing that, you can reduce the vast majority of risk in your OT environments. And I do talk sometimes. I've had the privilege with talking with some of the American nation state adversaries, right? And they don't say yes, or I get a lot of, nods or head shaking, and this is, one of the things that this you can, shut them down for the most part just by putting up that firewall or having that IT OT DMZ. Don't allow IT to reach into OT. Have OT send data out. Have OT reach out and pull information back, but never have IT with the capability to move into OT. Because if you do, the attackers, once they get into IT, they'll find that path and they'll use it. We see it, unfortunately, all the time. So that's, my number one control. We already talked about that. But I always like to focus also, and I see this unfortunately in a lot of control system shops and IT as well. It's kind of this compliance effort. Oh, we have a plan. We'll do all these 10 things and then we're done for the next 10 years. Like, no, we're always continually building. We're always continually improving. Again, whether it's in control systems, whether it's in IT, whether it's anything, right? We should always continually be improving. So that's where I put my top 20 controls together, right? Based off of the control, the critical security controls in IT, but just the fact that they, had this really simply written, right? It's just simply written so anybody could understand it. And it was this prioritized list of here's where you start because number one has the most risk reduction all the way to the bottom, the very end, like with penetration testing. Right? I used to do a ton of penetration testing. I love doing penetration testing. Best job ever. Is it part of the picture? Yes. I love, again, and it's nothing against all my penetration testing friends, but does having a penetration test lower my risk more than putting a firewall in between IT and OT? No, of course not. So yeah, let's start with secure network architecture and work our way down. So anyways, that's of course a whole other conversation. So I'll be doing some live sessions on that as well. So And that's it. So again, I appreciate it. If I'll hang out for a little bit if anybody has any questions, but feel free to reach out. Again, probably most everybody already finds me on LinkedIn, but feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. You can find my YouTube channel with the 25-hour course on YouTube at utilsec. My GitHub repository, which has the ebooks and a lot of cheat sheets, those are there. And then you can find links to everything at mikeholcomb.com. And then you can send me an email at mike@mikeholcomb.com. So I appreciate that. So yeah, thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody for joining, and stay safe out there. But have a great day. But yeah, thanks again for coming. And if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. I got probably a few minutes to hang out. Otherwise, I mean, I just got to go back to work. So I'm much rather be here. Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. So 5 hours into the YouTube course. So you're about a fifth of the way through. So hopefully it's been helpful. So I appreciate that. Yeah, good. So get a lot of feedback. So it's always fun. I know Steve mentioned zero trust, ideal for modern complex OT environments with a high risk profile and need for granular access control. Purdue models suitable for simpler legacy OT systems where clear segmentation is primary security. Yeah, that's a great way to put it for sure. I mean, zero trust, yes, is something for much more mature organizations down the road. Purdue model is a great way to introduce security to control system environments where there is none. Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a lot of large environments out there. I've talked with a lot of folks, especially through LinkedIn, that reach out, and where there is little to no security. And so if we have to start somewhere, yeah, let's start with the Purdue model. It's not going to hurt. We can still have conversations on 62443 and network segmentation there, and but let's let's start somewhere for sure. So yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. Is that Rita from France? So yeah, thanks for coming. I'll be hopefully in Paris in a couple months. So I'm really excited because I've never been. So I'm really excited. So it'll be fun. So all right. Well, thanks everybody. Again, I really appreciate everybody for joining. And then I'll try to do these a little bit more often. So oh, thanks, Raceline. Yeah, glad you liked it. Yeah, for those of you who hadn't seen, I took a couple weeks off of posting on YouTube after the course was done because I just 25 hours was a lot. And but I did post a Nmap part one. So there's 1 hour of how to use Nmap in ICSOT environments. So if you're curious, and we scan basically my home network as an IT network, and then I have the PLC lab I had set up for my master's research that I use. So you can see what it looks like scanning PLCs versus scanning things like Windows workstations and Roku TVs and Amazon Alexas. so so those type of things. Yeah, part two actually is tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. So definitely we put those out there. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll let you know. Maybe we'll be able to meet up. I'm not sure. I might actually only be there for the weekend, so it might not work out. But I'm actually trying to extend my stay since it's going to be the first time. So it's like we really should stay a lot longer. So, but all right. Well, thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it, and we'll see everybody on LinkedIn or elsewhere. So, all right. Well, take care.